Good morning, and welcome to the First Existentialist Congregation of Atlanta. We are a philosophically based spiritual community founded on existential philosophy and guided by feminist principles dedicated to human liberation and the protection of the natural world. My name is Patton White, and I will be facilitating this morning's celebration of life. We make our spiritual home in the Old Stone Church, which was hand-built 100 years ago by the African-American Antioch East Baptist Church. We honor their labors of love and the powerful history of this special place. We acknowledge that our spiritual home stands on land forcibly taken from the Muskogee Creek people. We support justice and equality for all indigenous people. This morning's opening words are a poem. It is entitled To Know the Dark by Wendell Berry. To go in the dark with a light is to know the light. To know the dark, go without sight, and find that the dark, too, blooms and sings and is traveled by dark feet and dark wings. Again, that is a poem entitled To Know the Dark by Wendell Berry. This morning we will be treated to Shower the People You Love with Love by our musicians Mick Kinney at the piano, Robert Stewart and Jean Heinrich singing and playing along. Please rise and bow to your spirit as you are willing and able, and if you'd like, join in singing yourself. Take it away, musicians.
One thing can be
Thank you all so much for that lovely rendition of that song. Today's speaker is Michelle Wilson. Michelle is a Black queer woman born and raised in Kansas City, Missouri. They have worked in social justice, community engagement, and politics for over 14 years. They started their journey as a teenager as the first Black woman appointed chairman of the KCMO Youth Commission, where they led a team of young people who created policy recommendations for the city government. They went on to study political science in Little Rock, Arkansas, at Philander Smith College. They were a founding member of the first Gay-Straight Alliance at a historically Black institution in Arkansas. Afterward, they worked in the Social Justice Institute at Philander Smith College, managing programs and events in social justice education for the campus and community at large. Michelle worked closely with the Human Rights Campaign to advance rights and visibility for Black LGBTQ+ folks. While in Arkansas, they were appointed to the Arkansas Coalition for Juvenile Justice, where they served to inform policy pertaining to incarcerated young people. Michelle was also a board member of Women Lead Arkansas, an organization geared toward the inclusiveness of women in political engagement. Michelle is now a resident in Atlanta, Georgia, and is set to receive their Master's in Political Science from Clark Atlanta University. Currently, they serve as a 2021 Reproductive Health Rights and Justice Fellow with the Rockwood Leadership Institute to deepen their commitment to movement and leadership development. They are excited to bring together their passions and education to fulfill the mission and vision of Women Engaged. In their free time, Michelle enjoys crochet, playing/streaming video games, and connecting with loved ones. Please join me in welcoming Michelle Wilson.
Hello, my name is Michelle Wilson with Women Engaged, and today we'll be having a conversation on power building through political education, a discussion on reproductive justice and civic engagement. I apologize in advance for not being on video right now, but I just feel like having a PowerPoint, one, is helpful to guiding the conversation, and two, is just a really great visual representation for the things that I'm discussing today. I'll make sure to provide a PDF copy for you all, and I'll make sure to be on camera for you all after this for the Q&A later. But until then, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm really excited to dive into the conversation. So I always like to ground my conversations in a quote by Tony K. Bambara. The revolution begins with the self, in the self. We'd better take the time to fashion revolutionary selves, revolutionary lives, revolutionary relationships, which we use to really motivate us into the work that we do at Women Engage and what this discussion is about today. But just to give a little bit more introduction, again, Michelle, I use pronouns they and she, and I was born and raised in Kansas City, Missouri. I've worked in this field for a little over 16 years now, and I've been in the South for over 10 years. Really excited to be a part of the Women Engage team. I've been with Women Engage for about a little over 4 years now, going into my 5th year. And I'm really excited to bring to you this work. I have a background in political science. I've worked in city governance before. I've done advocacy and activism since I was probably like the age of 14. And so really excited to bring to you all the things that I know and love so we can talk about how we build power in our communities. So Women Engaged, just for context, was founded in 2014 by Malika, pictured on the left, and Margaret Carbo, pictured on the right. And our mission is to inspire Black women, femmes, and girls in the communities around us to be impactful leaders and key decision makers when it comes to the issues that impact us most. And we do this through our integrated voter engagement program, which is our We Vote, We Rise program. What that means is that we are making sure that we're taking these information to people in our neighborhoods to have these kind of conversations around things that they may not always bring to their legislators, and really connecting that to our voting rights and our civic participation. We're uniquely positioned at the intersections of reproductive justice and civic engagement. And today I'm going to show how all these things link together and the actions that we can take around the issues. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the distinction between reproductive health, rights, and justice. And so the reason for this is because oftentimes, especially now, we hear about reproductive justice, but a lot of times people narrowly only see it as reproductive health. Reproductive health deals more with the individual services, while reproductive rights deals with legal and advocacy. But reproductive justice is an intersectional human rights framework that was developed by 12 amazing Black women in 1994. We define reproductive justice as the complete physical, mental, spiritual, political, economic, and social well-being of women, femmes, girls, trans, and non-binary and men people. It will be achieved when we have the economic, social, and political power and resources to make healthy decisions about our bodies, sexuality, expressions, and reproductive for ourselves, our families, and our communities in all areas of our lives. The 4 core tenets of reproductive justice is to decide if and when to have a child or family, to decide when not to have a child or family, to have bodily autonomy, or the means to make decisions for ourselves in the best interest of ourselves, and to parent the children we have in safe and sustainable and thriving communities. We wholeheartedly believe that people are the experts in their own experiences. And oftentimes, especially when it comes to policies and procedures, and especially ones that dictate around our reproductive freedoms, we see it as one that is very oppressive and takes away that autonomy from us. And so in order to understand this more, the human rights framework comes from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which incorporates civil rights, political rights, economic rights, social rights, cultural rights, environmental rights, developmental rights, and sexual rights. Using this key component as a barometer to figure out how things line up on the scale of reproductive justice and its framework, it's really important that we ground ourselves in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to understand that this is a multi-pronged intersectional approach on how we understand these issues. So I mentioned earlier that we use integrated voter engagement, and so I wanted to define that a little bit because it's a little bit jargony. And it's really just a method of empowering community members just like you to take action and present pathways for leadership development to build power for the issues that matter most to us. And the reason that we do this is because it's to hold elected officials accountable, but also to build relationships in our communities for long-term engagement. What I mean by that is that oftentimes, a lot of times for people, the only time they hear about voting or elections is when it's a major election year. But truth be told, there's at least one election in your area at least once a year, if not more. And oftentimes, once we get done voting, we seldom hear from the people that we elected. And I can tell you that's just a little bit backwards. When we think about it, like we don't take on jobs and then never hear from the people who hired us again. We routinely check in on them. We have other tools of accountability and measurement. And so we want to do the same thing with our integrated voter engagement by building leaders in our communities, by representing pathways to leadership development so that people can feel astute about the issues. Because oftentimes, especially in our political arenas, they have very jargony language that sometimes is not accessible to other folks. So it makes it really hard and difficult for people to jump in. And so we help provide a bridge in order to get people involved, get people to build relationships with their legislators, to build relationships with their neighbors, and really move the needle in terms of building that community power, which is all through our connections to make progress on issues that matter most to us. So our methods of sustaining that engagement is through voter registration, of course, voting in the electoral process, citizen lobbying, and conversations and education. When it comes to voter registration, it's important that even if you are already registered to vote, that you routinely check your voter status. Simply doing things like moving or changing your name can sometimes mean that your voter status is no longer active. Or sometimes your Board of Elections may even make a mistake and think that you're no longer there and then try to remove you. I know that has happened to myself once before, and I am a very active voter in the state of Georgia, where they had thought that I had moved and I was nowhere near moving, I was in my residence, and they sent me a letter and said it was time. And I was like, no, I'm still here. But a lot of times people don't know that these things are happening. We want to make sure that we are bridging that gap. We talked about voting. It's important that we vote not only for the top of the ticket, but down the ballot, because the government system as a whole is a system. It has different people in different roles. So I always use the example of utilities in the state of Georgia. Georgia has some of the highest utilities in the nation when it comes to cost. However, a lot of people oftentimes look at their city governance as the issue, when in reality, we should be looking at our public service commission, which is served at the state level, with positions that are elected to when it comes to, decreasing the cost around utilities. The next thing is citizen lobbying, making sure that we feel empowered to lobby our legislators and know that we can do that as citizens. You don't have to be a lobbyist. You don't have to be someone who's been in politics for a long time. You yourself as an individual can talk to your legislators directly and build relationships and lobby around the issues that matter most to you, your family, and your communities. And last but not least is to continue to have conversations and educate ourselves around the political process and also the things that are transpiring in an act of transparency to ensure that everything is being understood and taken in well for other folks. Our theory of change on this is that we speak and uplift and amplify the lived experiences in conversation, meaning that, again, you are the expert of your own experiences. We understand and seek to understand the various forms of oppression and what systems sustain them. So oftentimes, looking at voting rights, people see it as a thing that, like, well, why aren't you registered to vote? Well, first of all, we don't start from a place of shame, because sometimes there are systems in place that make it difficult for someone to register. I know from my own personal experiences, I went to a community and a gentleman who was probably I think he was in his late 70s, early 80s, told me that he had never registered before because he couldn't read and he felt shame around that. And I told him that, there's no need to feel shame around that, but really understanding what it took for him in his path, in his pathway of life and his journey to get to this point. I felt, first of all, very honored that he would trust me with that, and that he would take the time to register with me, but also that, we come to our community members with that sense of understanding, and that it's not a moral issue in terms of that in those cases. We also need to continue to be engaged in the political process beyond major election years. So major election years, we know them like as our presidential elections, our statewide elections. And we want to make sure that we are actively doing our due diligence to be engaged beyond that, making sure that we're staying up to date about what's going on in the legislature. And even if we don't have the capacity to stay engaged, following every committee meeting, that we're plugging into organizations like Women Engaged and others who are doing the work for us to get that information. And last but not least is, again, identifying and addressing the barriers that prevent us from participating fully. So when it comes to the issues and the issues that matter most to us, in the state of Georgia, Georgia has not expanded Medicaid, which has led to a number of issues across the state. The first being that it leaves roughly about 1 in 8 Georgians without healthcare due to the healthcare wage gap. Next, over 13 rural hospitals have closed over the last 10 years due to the lack of funding that we can get. And there's just federal dollars sitting there for us to use to provide healthcare for people in the state of Georgia. Lastly, to understand around this issue around healthcare is that, especially in the midst of a global pandemic and our healthcare system being strained, it's really more important now than ever to expand Medicaid to get access to those dollars and get us the help that we need in order to, boost energy into our healthcare system. But it's really important for us at Women Engaged that we advocate around this issue to our legislators and that we continue to let them know that it has not been forgotten. They oftentimes move very fast on other issues that have very political importance to them. But when it comes to the issues that matter most to us, they tend to sometimes move slowly, especially around this topic around Medicaid expansion. The next issue that we're tackling is centering around reparations. So there's actually 2 bills out there, and that's HR 40, which is on the federal level, and HB 541, which is on the state level. And I should go ahead and mention too, the reason why we are choosing the topic of reparations is because our CEO, Malika Redmond, saw that it's really important that we can't really achieve reproductive justice without first addressing the question around reparations and really truly reconciling this issue around race. Especially when we talk about the pervasiveness in which racism and enslavement has been enacted on people, especially across various identities and intersections. And so these bills will actually institute a commission, one on the state level and the other on the federal level, to study the injustices that have happened and come up with policy recommendations to enact reparations. And so what our goal is to continue to expand our imaginings around this, but to also push our legislators to pass these bills in order for us to study this. It's something that's been long awaiting us and something that we really need to see into fruition. Last but not least is a course around voting rights. So voters should choose their politicians. Politicians shouldn't choose their voters. Yet time and time after again, what we're seeing is that since the 2014 with the Shelby v. Holder case, the Shelby v. Holder case in 2013, they rolled back some of the protections in the Voting Rights Act of 1964. And what we have seen is an onslaught of political bodies and legislators attack our voting rights in very despicable ways that in essence is their attempt of trying to choose who their voters should be. When in reality, we should all have the right to vote. And that's just it. We should have the right to vote and make sure that our voices are heard and that we have a stake in who is being elected to office. And so what we've seen is that we saw with redistricting that they have already, and just for context, redistricting for folks who are new to this is a process where they take the information from the census and the legislator is supposed to use it to draw fairer maps or draw more equal maps. However, historically and traditionally, and also what has happened recently is that there usually happens on partisan lines where oftentimes the party that is in the majority often redraws the maps in a way to make sure they ensure that they maintain power and that they split up power amongst other political parties or political ideologies. And so that's what's already transpired here in Georgia with Brian Kemp, our current governor, signing that bill into law. And so those maps are newly into effect. However, what we're talking about is in terms of pushing back on this and continue to advocate around these issues, ensuring that we let them know that we're being vigilant and that we won't be silenced. So on the federal level, what we're seeing is around the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is that our biggest hurdle right now, and also the same hurdle with reparations, is the filibuster. For folks who are new to the filibuster is an act in which, in an effort to not bring something to a vote, they just continue to talk about other business. And filibusters can last indefinitely, depending on how many people you have who are willing to switch in and out of the process. And this is definitely an issue when it comes to progressing more affirmative legislation for our communities, especially on the federal level. And it's really important that we continue to advocate to our legislators the need to do away with the filibuster and to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. The next thing around the voting rights in particular, especially on the state level in Georgia, is that last year they passed SB 202, which was the big voter suppression bill. It reduced the number of days in which you can return your absentee ballot. It reduced the number of weekend polling options that were there. And what we saw is that in response to that, a real call to how local officials were really crucial in continuing to protect those rights. The previous mayor of Atlanta, Acacia Bottoms, actually went to enact some laws and policies to ensure that, at least in the city of Atlanta, to give them a buffer around some of the voter suppression that was taking place, and to a point where she even extended voting hours up to 8 p.m. on election day for the municipal elections that transpired. And so I already talked about the filibuster. See, I was a little bit ahead of myself, but I hope you enjoyed this little imagery in this picture here. And so this is really where it comes to the culmination of our work and the work that we do, and what I'm calling for you all to do as well. Is one is to contact your legislators. And you can contact your legislators on a city level, on a state level, on a federal level, on a county level, all of them. We want to contact all of them and let them know that, one, we're here to stand for change and that they can do what they can in their power to protect the rights that we have, and also to expand the rights that folks are currently not taking measure on. So even if it means outlining provisions that affirm if things change that they will make a certain action, you can do that. The next is to amplify the messaging that we need progress. So we need to continue to push the needle on these various issues. We need to continue to push the needle and educate people about the reality that some people really cannot afford to go to the doctor, to understand the reality that there are whole counties in Georgia that don't have emergency rooms or doctors in their area, and people have to sometimes drive upwards to 2 hours to go to the nearest doctor, where in some of these counties it is literally a death sentence to be pregnant. Understanding the issues around housing insecurity right now, especially in the midst of a global pandemic, understanding the need of our healthcare workers and our healthcare providers. And I think a lot of times, especially now, we see that there's been a lot of increased traffic around social media. And I say that that is still a great tactic to use. I always just say, let's push it a little bit further and let's take it old school. That means that we are writing letters, that we're sending emails, and that we're even making phone calls. While right now, especially due to COVID, you can't necessarily lobby to state legislators in person, we can still do what's in our power to make sure that we are getting our voices heard and that we're cultivating these relationships, not only when things are in crisis, but also when we want to push things that are really important to us. And last but not least is to keep engaging with the issues through education. So today was a little bit of a sampler plate of the various issues, and I'm really excited to actually dive down and talk to you all further in the latter part of this when we're live to engage around these conversations about the issues and how we get involved. But it really starts with things that what we're doing today, which is just having a conversation about it. It's important that we continue to talk about these issues, that we continue to educate ourselves about it, and that as we learn something that we are now telling our neighbors, because that is really the secret ingredient, the secret sauce, if you will, like to really enacting the change that we need to see and changing the hearts and minds necessary to really get the votes that are necessary to enact the progress that we need for our community. So it all builds upon itself, and it's all very much connected for us. Because when it comes to these issues, we can't no longer wait. We've been asking for things like $15 an hour for like over the past, I want to say nearly 8 years, to the point now that like $15 is no longer even a livable wage for most folks. We're talking about the state of public education, right? We're talking about the housing issues and housing discrimination that is still taking place. There's so many things that can still happen, and I can understand that it also seems a little bit overwhelmed with how much that is there, but I always say is that it's just taking it one step at a time and starting where we know and continue to push forward with that. And so I invite you here that this is a time where you find like a political home or a political start. You know, you're not in this alone. And so I definitely invite you, if you want to join with us and volunteer with us, that's always available. But I'll use the words of our co-founder and CEO, Malika, which is we want to make sure that people that we target know about and can participate where they are and be civically engaged. Meaning that we truly meet people where they are. There's no shame in not understanding certain things about the political process. There's no shame in not understanding about these things because, you know, navigating the day-to-day is difficult for a lot of folks. And, you know, we're here to continue to bring more, you know, to the conversation. And so I'm really excited to dig down deeper, and I'm hoping that you all have more questions to talk about these things. But I know we are a little short for time. So again, if you want to volunteer, that's www.womenengage.org/join. You can also email me at info@womenengage.org and just say that you want to speak to Michelle. And you can also check us out on our website. And so, oh, and also don't forget to follow us on social media. We do amazing things. We also have like a weekly live series on YouTube called You Ask Where We Answers, where we take deeper dives into some of these conversations. And we also just celebrated 7 amazing years of doing this work, and all of our anniversary videos, which were all virtual for the most part, are still up on our YouTube page. We had fitness classes, we had amazing, robust conversations. So I hope you'll check those out as well. But I really appreciate your time today. I'm excited to dig into the live conversation with you all, and talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for your wonderful words. Please join us on Zoom immediately following this broadcast for our meet and greet, where we will discuss the topics or themes brought up by our speaker today, as well as sharing personal joys, sorrows, and concerns, and also the sharing of community announcements. You can find the link to the Zoom meeting in the chat section of today's broadcast. Next week, we will be welcoming back the Reverend Kimball Sorrells with their talk, Cultivating Compassion. So please join us on Zoom or come back next week at 11 a.m. here and for our virtual celebrations of life. Until then, have a wonderful rest of your week, the coming week ahead, and we'll see you when we see you. Bye-bye.